Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Canadian Intercollegiate Exhibition. My name is Shadi Hanna, and I am your host of today's panel. And joined alongside me are some of Esport Canada Post Secondary's distinguished members here to talk a little bit about what it is that we do at ECPS, the services that we provide, and kind of some of the future outlook on the Canadian esports scene and how we intend to support and contribute to the growth of esports in Canada. So I want to first thank everybody for joining me today for this conversation and offering your time and your experience to this conversation. We'll start with a quick little introduction and just get to know a little bit from everybody and where you place yourselves in the Canadian esports ecosystem. So, Shaun, why don't you take it away?
Sure. So I'm Shaun Byrne. I'm the esports director at St. Clair College in Windsor, Ontario. I've been working in esports since about 2011 when I was a student at the University of Windsor. And then after that, for a little bit, running events throughout Ontario. And then eventually in 2017, started the program here at St. Clair College. So I kind of served dual role as a director of the varsity program and a teacher in the esports administration diploma program.
Thank you, Shaun. Andrew, if you don't mind.
Yeah, hello. My name is Andrew Tran. I'm the esports coordinator here at Southern Alberta Institution of Technology in Calgary, Alberta. I've been involved with esports since I was 9 years old. I'm 26 now, competing in a game called Super Smash Bros. Melee. And through my 17 years, I've helped volunteer with broadcasting, got hired by the Alberta Esports Association to be the academic relations specialist, and I'm now hired as the esports coordinator for the state children.
All right, thank you, Andrew. Bill, why don't you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi guys. My name is Bill. I'm the esports manager at Durham College. A little bit about me. I used to compete competitively in Counter Strike Source, almost just over a decade ago. It's been quite a long time. A little bit about my background. I used to help organize and operate grassroots events in Toronto. So at a place that used to be called the Hive Esports Raiders. And I also have built the largest Chinese North American gaming community alongside hosting events in the past in Ontario called LAN War, one of the biggest LAN events in Canada, as well as building and founding the Durham College esports program. Initially through the Student Association back in 2016 and officially through the college itself and the varsity program in 2018. Yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Thanks, Bill. Zach, we'll go to you.
Good morning, everyone. Zach Dodge, Supervisor of Esports Operations at Conestoga College in Waterloo, Ontario. I've been with Condors Esports here for 1 year this week, actually. We're a varsity esports operation under the Athletics and Recreation Department here at Conestoga. My background, I've been in student services or student leadership for over a decade at this point, always kind of carrying a gaming-minded side hustle or career. I've been a game tester, tournament organizer, amateur Halo player in the golden era of Halo 2, Halo 3, Halo Reach, and really been trying to interact in all things gaming and esports all through my adolescent and kind of young professional career. So nice to finally position it all in a collegiate esports program here in Waterloo.
Great, thank you. And Tyler, we'll have you bring it home.
Hello, everybody. My name is Tyler Hetherington. I'm the esports coordinator for the Fantra Student Union at Fantra College in London, Ontario. I got into this role a little bit of a different way. I come from the events side of things. I was the events person on our campus for many years. So I put on the frost shows, everything that was kind of an event or was the fun at Fantra College. I was in charge of that for many years. While I was doing that, I pitched our esports program from the beginning and built it from the ground up. And it started off as just weekly tournaments on Monday nights with Smash. So it's nice to hear some more Smashes all around this panel. So that's nice. It just grew to a point where it became a full-time thing here at Fanshawe. And I'm happy to be here with everybody.
Awesome. Thank you, and Tyler, as our chair of Esport Canada Post Secondary as well. We'll definitely be leaning on you and relying on you to kind of paint a bigger picture of what it is that we're here to talk about today. And just to quickly introduce myself as well, my name is Shadi Hanna. I'm the head coach of esports at Keanu College in Fort McMurray, Alberta. We are one of a handful of varsity esport programs in Canada as well. And I'm a former graduate of St. Clair's program. Shaun was actually my professor for a little bit as well. So I've kind of been here and there and everywhere in esports as well. So it's a pleasure to be hosting a panel for this group of very experienced leaders in the country. To start things off, for those of people that might be just tuning in or, saw the words Esport Canada and were intrigued about what that means or what that looks like, Tyler, maybe you could give us a little bit of an introduction as far as what Esport Canada Post Secondary actually is and what we do.
Sure. So the verbatim mission is Esport Canada Post Secondary is an independent body working under the Esport Canada umbrella and representing all post-secondary esports programs in the country that apply and are accepted for membership. Its goals are to elevate post-secondary esports in the country and advocate on behalf of Canadian esports programs. And we do that through our pillars, which is advocacy, recognition, and education. Basically, a lot of the esport directors from across Canada, we came together and really wanted to help elevate the scene. A strong Canadian collegiate scene helps all of our individual programs as well as the entire Canadian scene. And you can tell by our connections to the K-12 scene as well that we want to help elevate that because it's only going to make our collegiate scene even better. So at the core of what Esport Canada Post Secondary wants to do is get together, help elevate, create more esport directors, get more programs with proper support, get more programs out of the club level into the varsity, into the community focused kind of programs across Canada, and just elevates the big word. We're here to support each other. We're all, some of us compete on the virtual pitches, but we're all here for each other. And we've had some people over just our first year have some amazing growth. And some people get hired as full-time staff, and they started off, a year ago just being like a club president or just being a student volunteer. So that's fantastic. There's a lot of programs in the South, and we want Canada to get to those levels. In Esport Canada Post Secondary, we're meeting with schools all across Canada quite constantly, and we always just want to get those programs the proper support, and we're all coming together to do it together. I don't know if that helped answer the question there.
No, it's a great overview of kind of some of the underlying principles or objectives of the organizations. Canadian esports scene is still growing. I mean, we've had a presence, I believe, as early as 2016, and if not earlier than that, in some capacity, but still making every effort we can to catch up to the Americans, I suppose, in some degree in terms of size and scale. But there is quite a lot happening in Canada that people don't really know about. Shaun, I'll kick this one to you. If you could give us a brief overview of what esport programming at the post-secondary level looks like in Canada today.
Yeah, so I'll go back to what you just touched on before. Like, Canada has been involved in collegiate esports since almost the beginning. So collegiate esports, you can trace the roots back all the way to about 2009, with the original versions of the Collegiate Star League and that kind of thing. And as far back as 2011, 2010, 2012, Canadian schools were performing, like, punching above our weight. Especially schools like UBC, University of Toronto, Waterloo. You can go back, and unfortunately the records aren't kept very well, but there are some North American championships that those schools have from back in those days. So now with the advent of the idea of varsity programs coming around in about 2015, a few of us got off to a kind of a decent head start. So St. Clair and Lambton College specifically, and launched in 2017. Durham College, Bill, you can correct me. I don't exactly know when. Was it the same year, 2018? Around the same time, I think.
So this is a funny question and a funny debate between that I get asked between my program and program at St. Clair all the time, who started first. So I think it's based off of a technicality, to be completely honest, because we technically started in 2016 via our student association that was combined at the time. But then that student association ended up dissolving because we share a campus with the University of Ontario, or they're called Ontario Tech College, our university now. So we used to share a student union, and then that got split. So then we went and reformed in 2018. So technically we formed in 2016 and then gapped in 2017 or 2016, gapped in 2017, and then officially formed again at the college under varsity athletics in 2018. So right around the same time, kind of, I would say, is when all of the major steps for Canadian institutions that were taken to kind of push the collegiate landscape in Canada to the trajectory that it's on now. I feel like those 3 years were kind of the groundbreaking years.
Yeah, so basically, like 2015, things started off in the U.S. with a small number of schools, and then Canada, we were about a year and a half behind, getting things started here. And we started off a little bit slow, 2, 3 schools. But I've found that just within the last year, things have really started to speed up, and I think a lot of that might have to do with Esport Canada Post Secondary, kind of giving people somewhere to go. I think the problem that we realized, and this goes back to, I had conversations with Tyler and with Ben Bramley, who's at Keanu as well, like basically just over a year ago, I think it was, and that was kind of what we were seeing, is that people wanted to pursue esports at their schools, but they didn't know where to go. And so unfortunately, they were going to these kind of like shady entities, and those shady entities were helping them get started, and unfortunately burning a lot of money along the way. And so we realized, okay, maybe we can create something that will help. We can maybe Esport Canada Post Secondary, at the time we didn't even have a name for it, but maybe whatever this association ends up being can be the tide that raises all boats, right? And we've seen that happen a lot. So what does it look like right now? I mean, we've got somewhere, and Tyler can maybe correct me if he's got the webpage open, but somewhere around 10 schools that are kind of fit that varsity criteria at this point, within Canada. A handful of more that are sort of on their way. They've set kind of a mission of getting to varsity status, and they've got a few more boxes to check, right? And then you've got obviously a plethora of club teams. Basically, every school in Canada has at least a club team of some sort. It's very rare that you hear of a college or university in the country that doesn't have at least one team competing in something, or at least at minimum a casual gaming club on campus. So um, we might be a little bit behind the U.S., I'd say, in terms of varsity development, but esports Canada's been in the mix right from the beginning, and I think we've got a bright future of staying in the mix moving forward, especially with the very optimistic, like positive movement that we've seen just over the last 6 months to a year.
Yeah, I like how you started off by talking about 2009 as being like a launch point, because oftentimes the date and stat that you hear cited is Robert Morris 2014, but that might be the first varsity program. But collegiate esports have existed, quite a while before that, as well. Bill, seeing as you were one of, kind of like you mentioned, the first in those formative years in the Canadian scene, you've had an opportunity to kind of watch schools such as your own and nearby your own grow and elevate their programming over the last 5 to 7 years. How would you say that the presence and recognition of esports within the Canadian post-secondary scene has grown in the last few years?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. Obviously, myself, Shaun, and a couple of others in the collegiate space in Canada can attest to this. And Shaun kind of briefly touched on it as well. At the current rate at which collegiate esports is growing in Canada is something that we had always hoped for, but we didn't know when something like this was going to happen. And at the foundation, in terms of when, like, and I can only speak to my administration and my boss and whoever, we talked about when we founded collegiate esports in our institution was, do we want to be 5 years in by the time everybody wants to be involved in varsity and collegiate esports, or do we want to be 5 years late? And that was always a conversation that was had, basically to attest to how much commitment and how much effort, funding, etc., needed to be put into collegiate and varsity esports. And I think that attests, in terms of what the scene and the scope of everything looks like right now. I think it attests to the mindset that we had back then. Was, when everybody else wants to be like, oh, esports is actually a big deal and it's actually extremely beneficial institutionally and to the students as a whole. Let's get involved. How do we get involved? Which we're seeing a lot of within this year, last year, and I'm sure we'll see way more in 2024. You know, being the schools that have already, for better or worse, for the most part, we have formed some sort of legacy in Canadian esports, are able to assist and guide these new institutions that want to come into this space. I think that's a big part of why the recognition and the growth of Canadian esports is, I would say, currently growing almost at the same, if not faster, than how many schools in the US are tackling on esports. I think, as Shaun said, we are behind in some portions in comparison to the States. For example, you know, scholarship funding is a big one, and the amount of money that they pay their coaching staff is another. Those are two very, very big factors, which make it very hard for us as the Canadian scene to necessarily compete with some of those tier one big money schools in the US. However, I think the passion in Canadian collegiate esports is there. It's huge and it's exponentially growing. I don't know about anybody else on the panel, but I get so many emails a week from all sorts of different institutions that are like, "Hey, we're, you know, we potentially want to build an esports program, or how do we get started, or what are the first steps, or can you help us with this, that," and a lot of questions coming in, which, you know, we're always, I'm sure everybody here is always super happy to answer and help to the best of our ability, because I think, you know, that creates the recognition of esports in Canada. The more institutions that are involved, the more recognition that exists, and the more institutions that are involved, the better the growth of the whole scene is, right? As everybody can attest this. If some school is doing this, then we're like, oh, hey, they're doing that. Why can't we, right? So a big thing, thanks Zach, by the way, for this, is they started hiring coaching staff. And now that's a big push that we're making in the collegiate space in Canada. We're like, okay, well, if they're doing it, then we need to be doing it. Because before it was always like, oh, you know, the big schools in the US are hiring coaching staff and they're doing this and they're not, oh yeah, but that's the States, right? Is the answer we would get a lot. Well, not anymore, right? So every time somebody pioneers something in the Canadian scene, we all grow as a whole. And I think that's a unique part of, you know, our landscape, is that we are so connected, in the sense that we are always looking to propel each other forward more so than finding ways to get ahead and pushing others back. So that's what I feel like is pretty unique and very cool about the Canadian post-secondary esports growth in comparison to where I've seen anywhere else. You know, I've worked with partners in internationally, not just the US, like in China, Korea, Japan, those places. And it's a lot more, how do we get ahead and push you behind, versus in uniquely in the Canadian scene, we have, all right, I'm going to take this step. How can I help you take this step with me? So yeah, sorry for a bit of a tangent, but that's basically, I feel like, a good overall summary of what the Canadian varsity and post-secondary esports landscape kind of looks like.
Yeah, and I just want to point out, he was mentioning those emails that he gets quite often. That was one of the reasons we all came together as well, is because Shaun and everybody, we all knew these schools were calling us constantly or emailing us constantly, and Esport Canada Post Secondary gives them a place to go and start those conversations a lot or more organically, and as a full group and a group effort, which is really nice.
Yeah, to touch on that too, ever since we started Esports Canada Post Secondary, ever since, you know, we became more official and recognize, okay, this is the place to go, I receive a lot less emails, and we have more people coming into Discord and contacting, you know, I'm sure contacting everybody else, but probably mostly Tyler about, okay, how do we get involved? How do we get started? And then they have this bigger pool of resources versus just reaching out to every single school individually. They now have a centralized place to get started.
You muted, Shadi.
You're muted, Shadi.
I am muted. Thank you. I was going to ask you about some of the highlights from ECPS, but we can check off clearing out Bill's inbox as number one for highlights. But maybe I know we've only got you for a limited time, so I'll just ask you. You know, since formation in the fall of 2022, have you noticed you know, any major developments or major growth through the organization that you know, you can kind of credit to the work that ECPS has done?
I'd like to point to Zach, actually. He came in as a fresh new person to this world at the very beginning of Esport Canada Post Secondary, and he's building a monster over there in Conestoga. So I think he has a very unique way of looking at this. But yeah, it's just for the most part, it's the recognition and the acceptance from schools. And like when I'm getting, like, I met with like a Christian college or a Christian university last week, and it was from the registrar's office, and they found us through our online presence. So it's just like it gives that official feeling and gives that official company for people to approach and know that there's higher ed involved, knows that there's full-time people involved. It's not just a club level type of thing. And yeah, it's just that growth, and that's been the biggest change. I do take all those emails. Thanks, Bill. And we do have those meetings quite a bit. And I love it. That's awesome. It's always great to see programs starting anywhere in Canada. But I do want to thank everybody. I do have to leave early to be a dad and go pick up from the bus, but I apologize for everybody. But these are some awesome people here, and I'll be out of here. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Tyler, for being able to share with us before you took off for today. We appreciate it.
Thanks, Tyler. I'm happy to roll with that for a second, Shadi, because like I'll never forget.
I think we'll be good.
I think
We'll
it's
just
okay.
see. I'm just gonna wait for Twitch to get caught up here. All right. Hello, Twitch chat. Can you hear us? Can you see us?
Maybe.
I'm staring at the chat right now.
Save.
We
We
back.
back. We back.
All right,
we're game
Zach,
plan.
summarize the last 2.5 minutes in like
Yeah.
10 seconds.
Safe to say we can all blame that on Tyler, but it was more or
Yeah.
less identifying that the formation of Esport Canada right through this boom that we're all kind of identifying was serendipitous to just the best practices and the trusted network that's come together and that beacon of like safe information. I know as a new operator, like 1 year into the game at this point, to have folks in this panel that I've been able to lean on to solve what would have been a huge undiscovered problem years back. The generosity around here's a document to support this, here's what we've done, here's a process that we've tried, here's a job description. Like it's been phenomenal, just the community, the generosity to expedite things that otherwise you're doing from scratch. And it's just been really, really encouraging, and it takes some of the the scariness away and like chipping away at a mountain every day. You know, we all know what that feels like, trying to get our esports programs
Right.
in a good position. So yeah.
Well, I have to say, Zach, you know, you might feel that we're elevating your program up by just existing in Esport Canada Post Secondary, but I think you definitely have the best lexicon out of all the collegiate directors in all of Canada. So you're helping our vocabulary out just every time you share and speak. So we appreciate that. from you.
Very fortunate for the
That's a-
resources and support at Conestoga.
That's it. It's a good. This is a perfect segue into the academic integration of esports and how we can all learn and get a little bit better. Andrew, I want to pitch this one to you. If you can talk about how post-secondary institutions in Canada are starting to integrate their esports programming into their academic programming, and what that integration looks like and means for Canadian colleges and universities.
Yeah, so here at SAIT, we're working very closely with the radio broadcast television news program, finding ways for these production students to learn about esports shoutcasting and esports production. You can see across Canada, especially at in Alberta specifically, in Piano College offering a esports business administration program, as well as Bow Valley College, which in Calgary, which going to start their program in the winter, which is business administration. So I think providing these kind of esports curriculum within the institution itself will allow students to see like, hey, there's jobs, this profession in esports that's just not that you don't have to be a player to work in esports. You can work in broadcasting, you can work in management. There's a lot of different jobs that goes with esports.
Yeah, to go off of that, I'd love to kind of pitch a question to the wider group. You know, we talk not just about the academic integration, but especially at like the college polytechnic level, Andrew, we talk a lot about like work integrated learning, right? Is the big keyword here in Alberta. And I think just about every person on this call, except for me, has work study opportunities at their college. Maybe if someone wants to jump in and describe what a work study opportunity looks like at a Canadian esports program.
I can jump in to start off. So work study, and this probably work differently in every province. I don't know if it's exactly the same, but here in Ontario, students under work study, you need to be a full-time enrolled student, maybe part-time, I'm not sure. But generally, it's partially funded by the government. So, you know, they want to create opportunities for students to get work while they're studying in school to help, you know, offset the cost of being a student. And so, you know, there's lots of jobs that are subsidized by the government on campuses around the country, or at least Ontario. And esports programs, you know, if through creativity, you can sometimes take advantage of some of those resources being available. We've been lucky enough here at St. Clair to right from the get-go be able to utilize that money. And so I think, Shadi, you were on work study at some point when you were at St. Clair.
That's right.
You know, right now, you know, going into next year, we'll have somewhere around, I don't know, 40 students on work study, like throughout the
Wow.
program in various different capacities, like working in our facility or on the broadcast team, marketing team, coaching positions. So you're able to kind of utilize that to offset the cost. You know, it's not free to run a program, right? It costs money to run a program. But when you're able to spin that back to administration saying like, you know, these are work study positions, students are learning while they're doing this, it becomes like a little bit of an easier pill to swallow. So it's usually a better starting point than just, you know, going straight to, I need to hire somebody full time to come in and work in the program. That's a little bit more difficult a lot of times. So starting with those work study positions, it allows programs to kind of scale up without it being you know, just that immediate no that you'd get trying to get some full-time positions sometimes. So
Sure.
yeah, work study you can use in a variety of ways. Like I mentioned, for us, we've got coaches on work study. We have broadcast staff on work study. We have marketing people, graphic designers. So you name it, you can utilize work studies to fill out your staff in a variety of ways.
It's a huge piece on campus as well when you can talk to senior administration, and when you say that, hey, you have an esports operation of some sort going on campus, it's not just influencing and impacting your student athletes, those that are interacting on the competitive teams. It's nice to be able to show we have these teams and these leagues, these staff and these portfolios, this Discord community, this is what's going on social media. And it starts to show what could be understood as that niche gaming thing on campus is truly having a much larger impact than maybe what's just seen by a Valorant team. To kind of tie in the academic side and the work study side, and Shadi, you mentioned work integrated learning and how that differs a little bit, but it's also huge. Like, it differs from work study, but it's kind of cut from the same cloth, if you will. But part of our efforts this year at Conestoga has been connecting early on with kind of the academic influencers and those that are developing esports curriculum at Conestoga, and identifying where esports operations in like a live classroom lab-based environment can be brought into what we're doing with Condors Esports versus just what you're doing in the classroom. And I look forward to a future, like we'll probably see it come online in winter 2024, but instead of just having a theory-based or a lab-based class running an esports production, your in-classroom time could be tailored around Wednesday night League of Legends, and you're getting to kind of practice and rotate through different kind of broadcast-based positions, and that's going to be baked into the curriculum as part of the classroom experience. And that, like a good example of work integrated learning, and we see that model being very helpful going forward at Conestoga.
Yeah, to jump in just on that point too. Love that you talked about that. That's something that we've worked on at Durham as well. Obviously, for me personally, I'm significantly more dedicated, and a bigger part of my role is to grow the varsity program and how our varsity operations kind of work at Durham. But we have the esports business management grad cert, as well as just at general broadcasting programs at Durham, who have reached out, from sports admin to even some business programs looking to come into the esports arena and that space, to utilize that space to give students an experience that not necessarily they wouldn't necessarily be able to get in some other places, right? So integrating esports into more than just traditional esports programs is something that we've strived to do here as well. And then just to touch on, from my perspective for work study and things like that, I think, obviously I don't have as many as Shaun in terms of, like, that's 40 work study students is amazing. That's incredible. But I agree in terms of, for growth and scaling, work study students is probably the best place to start to grow your program and scale your program to get the alleviation of, for example, I know a lot of institutions are working on a single full-time or single part-time employee running the entire show type deal. While that will work for the first year or two, maybe, it's not feasible for long-term sustainability. It's not a model that will work long term, because if you want growth as well as operation, it's not something that one person can tackle. So students, especially who love the space, and obviously one of the most overused words in our industry is passionate. But that is the case, right? Like, students are passionate, they want to be involved, and if they can get some sort of work study placement within the institution, within the esports program, that's always an excellent opportunity that we look to give our students as well, with the reopening of our facility now back to the public, because our esports arena was closed to the students and the public actually since COVID, and only varsity has had access to it up until this September. So I know some of I've been MIA recently, and that's with good cause. There's been some overhauls and things that I've been doing with the program to incorporate more work study and more student learning, as well as overall growth of the program. So
Right. Yeah, I mean, to quickly comment on Keanu's program, because I do want to say there are some things that I think some opportunities that we are able to leverage right now as far as our esports management diploma program. We have like a 50-hour placement or practicum, but it's something that even with my administration I'm working on building into, because you're totally right, Bill. Is one person cannot operate as well as grow by themselves, right? You're oftentimes forced to choose to do one or the other, and We've seen a lot of programs. I was looking through the Twitch chat. Every time you see me doing like this, it's because I'm looking at the Twitch chat, reading through some of the questions. Other schools are talking about how, they have these big giant clubs that haven't been able to push to the next level because there hasn't been that, they haven't seen that support. And I think ultimately that's what Esport Canada Post Secondary is supposed to do, is to try to help grow those programs to help them get to that next tier and above and beyond. Andrew, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes. So, since SAIT is under the varsity program in athletic and recreation, we hire part-time students to help out with the esports program. So I don't know if your case, Shadi or Zach, is that within athletic, we have the man official position as well as the wellness center for recreation side of things. And we use those job position to give part-time hours to our students. So not only do they help me build out the engagement side of esports, but they're also getting paid to do so. So under me, I have 2 part-time staff that's helping me with the recreation and engagement and getting people inside our esports studio and supervising it. So that's how I was able to go from being a solo part-time staff at SAIT to having 2 other part-time staff helping build this program out.
Right. I'm actually we've had a couple of topics or questions that we'd identified of wanting to touch, but the Twitch chat is asking some absolute bangers right now. So we're gonna jump over to Twitch chat and start kind of fielding some questions for the community a little bit. Seems to be a lot of interest from people I'm recognizing as either new entrants to the Canadian collegiate scene or people that are potentially interested in getting involved in the scene. So a recent question here we just received is, how did you initially propose your program? So as a Canadian esports director or head coach, what were some of those like early days like? I think we'll try to go to one of the OGs here, just because I think for the rest of us, it's been, hey, we want to do what they're doing. So for the people that were doing it first, we'll start with Bill, Shaun, whichever one of you guys wants to jump up first. What was that initial conversation like?
Yeah, I guess I'll kind of get started. So our program started when I was actually a student. A lot of students nowadays tell me they feel like they're screaming into a void. I was there, felt the same thing. I get it. So the way our program initially started was I actually approached our student association, and back then when they were combined, I said, "Hey, collegiate esports, varsity esports, it's a thing, it's happening, and we need to be involved." And I was granted permission by the student association to run a pilot program. Essentially, they would seat it 1 tier higher than a regular club and support us with a little more funding, but it was nothing crazy. I think it was like $2,000 a year in comparison to the $750 that a club would get. And we started with that, and I basically built successful teams and that were placing internationally. And once we had that kind of momentum behind us, I connected with one of my professors, and he's a big streamer now and still teaches, Gamer Dad, or Michael Cameron. Some of you might be familiar with him, maybe not. But connected with him, then he connected me to our then varsity athletics director, Ken Babcock, who sat down with me, had a conversation, and basically was like, "Hey, all right, what's this all about? What's esports, and how do we get started? Why do we need this?" And I gave him my pitch. Honestly, it was talking about how varsity and collegiate esports would be a key aspect of growth, not only for the student experience on campus, but also the potential institutional growth that esports provides, from things like global recognition to even recruitment is a big thing. Because I don't know how, I'm sure Shaun and me kind of can both speak on this in terms of recruitment. We're able to get more students on our campus going to our school than traditionally without our esports programs, and the outreach and engagement that our programs are able to achieve is significantly higher than what our traditional even school marketing department or something like that could achieve, right? I know, Shaun, your social metrics blow mine out of the water, but even mine are like substantial. I think one year, like we had when we were in CRL for that one year, I think the engagement metrics was just like, in total in terms of VOD streaming, etc., was like millions of engagements. And when you have numbers like that and you bring it to your school's administration, they don't have a choice but to kind of give you the time of day, right? Like they can't just brush you off and be like, okay, this is not a thing. So I think to answer the question of how you initially should propose a program to your institution is, for one, like bring the numbers to back you up, and two, just show them that it's much easier now than it was when me and Shaun did this, right? Because of so many mature programs exist in Canada now, like you can just bring them an example. Look at St. Clair, look at Durham College, look at Conestoga, look at Keano, right? Look at any of these schools that are getting involved now and basically make the same argument that I did. In 5 years, do you want to be 10 years behind, or do you want to be 5 years in? And that's the question that I think you need to ask. And if they are, capable of seeing the value of esports, then I think getting off your feet isn't necessarily as hard as it.
Mm.
I don't know if I touched on everything, but Shaun, I'll kick it to you because you probably had a similar,
Yeah.
or maybe.
I'll start very briefly. So I've been working in esports since about 2010, 2011. But I was working kind of after I graduated from the University of Windsor. I kind of went out into the private world of esports, running events and stuff like this, Super Smash Bros. Tournaments and that kind of thing. And then eventually, St. Clair College has had a strong club. It used to actually be the IT club, and the IT club has been running a LAN party at St. Clair College for like the first one was 18 years ago. So it's been happening. Other than COVID, there's a gap now, but this year was the 15th one or the 16th. I can't remember, 15th or 16th one. So it's been going for a long time. So they approached me at one point saying like, look, we want to scale up this event. Generally was bringing in 100 or 200 people, maybe 300 at most, and they wanted to scale it up to something larger. And they came to me, seeing what we were doing with events in Toronto and this kind of thing. And so it came in, and through those conversations and getting introduced to people in the student union as well as people in athletics, I realized there was an opportunity. Like I had this little window of maybe I can go beyond just this one event. Like they're on board, they're going to bring me on to run one event, but maybe I can turn this into more than just one event. Like maybe we can, at this point, like this is 2016 when I was starting these conversations. There was a handful of articles from Robert Morris University out there now at this point. There was a little bit of data that you could lean on and say, this school's doing this. Like, why don't we just be the first school in Canada or one of the first schools in Canada to do this as like here? And so they like that idea. And that's kind of how everything started here. And then it just came down to really, putting on the salesman hat and selling everybody on the idea of what the story looked like and all of the things that Bill talked about, right? The different value to the institution that they can bring. And one thing that I'll say as a kind of a general statement is I think the biggest thing that happens when I get especially students come to me, and I saw somebody in the chat saying, they were a student and they've been trying to work on administration for years and it's not going anywhere. And it's like this is what I find with students is that they are always trying to go and ask for what they want. So they'll say like, we want scholarships and we want to have teams and we want a facility, just like St. Clair or just like Durham or whatever. In reality, what you should be doing is going to them and saying like, figuring out what this college wants. And I actually have this here. So I have this on my desk. So like schools probably all put these out, right? Strategic plan. You go through this strategic plan and it can tell you like what the objectives of the school are, right? These are the objectives of the school. So you go and find one of these, see if you can find one. Every school has it's like mandated in Ontario. You need to create a strategic plan. Go and find that, and then take the language straight from their strategic plan and and show how your program on your vision is going to help achieve what they're trying to do. And so instead of asking for what you want, tell them how you're going to help them do what they're like
Right.
laying out that they want to do, right? So that's kind of a more of a general statement of if you're at one of those schools where it's like we want to have a program and we haven't been able to break through yet, use their own words against them basically. You know what I mean? Like you said you want to be cutting edge and do new things. Like what else is more cutting edge than esports, right?
Right. Right. No, that's absolutely great advice. Like learning how to give as opposed to get, because oftentimes the two are kind of correlated, right? We've heard the words kind of tossed around, but in my experience, just to kind of tie the loose ends, the primary objective for any collegiate venture outside of the traditional world of academia is almost always going to be recruitment or retention, right? Because the more you recruit and the more you retain, the better you can do everything else, right? And that's where esports programs, I think, serve like their greatest value is in the ability to bring students to your campus, as Bill said, bring students that never would have considered Durham to Durham because of your esports program, and then to keep them there because of how much they enjoy the program that you're offering. So I think those are two great values that I've seen as being able to support that. And I did want to touch on, Bill, you mentioned as well, like how the competitive success of your teams internationally you found was actually bolstered your program's like growth and marketing efforts. I'd love to get a thought from the group. I mean, we have some very dominant programs here, not just in the Canadian scene, but also in the global scene as well about international competition. So Shaun, maybe we'll have you lead it off, and then I'd love to hear from the others because you guys had a really incredible year at the Saints. How have you found like the impact of international competition to support your program's growth?
I think like the biggest thing that I always do, and this goes back to what did Bill had a good word for it, like international recognition, or you had a better word for it, I feel like, than that.
Global
But
impact.
global, yeah, sure, global, whatever. The idea
I
here
don't
is
even
like
remember what I said.
you think about like you think about St. Clair College in general. Outside of Southwestern Ontario, very few people. Like we've got Andrew here from Alberta. Like before esports, have you ever even heard of St. Clair College? I can say with all honesty, I had never heard of your school. Like before getting to meet you and knowing your program through esports.
Yeah,
Um,
likewise.
so
Likewise.
so like that's what esports has done is that we have schools now that are from California, Texas. We've got students from around the world that are learning about our school because of it. I had a brief kind of conversation with American today and a brief conversation with an Australian player today looking for schools to come to. And you can look at our program. We've got players from Germany, the UK, the US, all around Ontario, all around Canada. And these are students that never would have heard of St. Clair College before if it wasn't for our esports program. So, it's really done that for us. Now, competing against the U.S., uh, the schools in the U.S. that have like these huge budgets and that kind of thing, we have this like what I like to say to my administration is we've got a very small window of opportunity right now where we're still like on a level playing field with those schools in the U.S. And I compare it to football. So if you look at football in the U.S., so some of our schools here in Canada, we have football teams, and schools obviously in the U.S., colleges have football teams. Your D1 programs in the U.S., your D1 football teams have like millions and millions and $1 million budgets, right? And it wouldn't matter how much, like it would be so hard for any of our schools to ever catch up. Like it would never happen. The difference is we're still on pace, so as long as we stay there, we can keep matching. If we let this get out of hand too far, the American schools, it's going to be impossible to catch up, just like it is in traditional athletics. So I kind of throw that over to my administration. Like, look, we don't have a chance to be Ohio State football here at St. Clair College. We have a football team, and they're very good in the Ontario sense, but we have no chance at becoming at that caliber. But in esports, we're already there. So as long as we keep putting the right resources in, we can stay there. And you've seen what that that level of athletics has done for those schools in the U.S. Like there are students that go to Ohio State and Michigan and Clemson, and they go to these schools because they have strong athletics programs.
Right.
And so we have a little window of opportunity to do the same thing in Canada, and that's from a like recruiting marketing perspective. So, um, it's we're still at a point where it might seem hard if you're like a middle of the pack team, filled with gold players and diamond players, and like this is tough. Like we can't compete against those full challenger rosters, but that's where we were 2 years ago. And now all of our teams, all five of our varsity teams, finished within the top 15-ish this year in North America, right? So in the span of 2 years, with the right resources put into the right places, you can do that.
Right.
If we go 10 years into the future, though, there's a lot of programs that are going to be so solidly built and have this big legacy. It's going to be hard to try to ramp up at that point. So back to kind of what Bill said, do you want to be the school who's 5 years behind, 10 years behind, or do you want to be one of the ones like leading the charge? It might be uncomfortable being at the front leading sometimes, but it's going to put you in a better position in the long run.
Right. Sorry, Bill, not to cut you off, but I wanna point to our two of our newer entrants to esports as well to kind of compare and contrast this global impact that programs like Durham and St. Clair have had. I mean, even not to toot my own horn, but we had a decent year at Keanu as well, right? But when you kind of look now to the local scene, especially when you're kind of a smaller school, but you're surrounded by giant schools like Zach. You're Conestoga College, and there's University of Waterloo, Wilfrid Laurier University. Andrew, it's SAIT, and then there's University of Calgary, Mount Royal. You have all these other big schools around you. How has esports helped you differentiate yourself locally from
Well,
the
yeah.
other schools there?
Where I was going to quickly chime in is celebrating those incremental steps along the way, because sure, it is tough to look at, Condors Esports, year 3 of the program, first year with the facility, personnel, coaching, etc. Kind of our relaunch year, if you will. And yeah, hard to compare and contrast with some established programs that are out with some killer momentum out in the scene. But some of the standout, moments that we would have had as a program this year, and the things that you need to celebrate internally and with your own administration, is when we were in the NECC playoffs and we took out University of Waterloo, their second-tier League of Legends team, but first time as the Conestoga Condors beating a local rival. And that kind of verbiage really rings true, internally at Conestoga College, that it's a very active community between the two universities in Conestoga, and just being able to exchange with management and senior administration that like our esports efforts are leading to, we're competing and surpassing some of our within our local community here, and even to shout out the efforts that we're doing with Esport Canada Post Secondary, where our Valorant squad by the end of the winter season crept onto the power rankings for the first time all year, one of only 2 Canadian colleges. I think the rest of the represented schools, I believe, were universities at the time. And I know, once again, creeping in 10th place on a power ranking, like our guys behind the scenes were gunning for that and inquiring about that and scratching at that all year, and how great that was of a milestone to celebrate internally with our teams, kind of shared around the Conestoga community, and just to kind of show that we're putting the work in, we're being recognized, even if it's for like a short-lived stint, that shows what we're aiming towards, and we can hang with the other guys, so it's sure, I think we it's easy to have those ambitious sights for the top, but important to celebrate and share the milestones and accolades along the way, so that internal buy-in sees the momentum and sees the influence that you're having.
I think we should talk on that a little bit, honestly, because I think that's one of the best examples of, like, one of the more tangible examples of what Esport Canada Post Secondary can do. Like, up until this year, there are rankings, there are power rankings, so there's lots of them. They go out all the time on Twitter and whatever else for collegiate, but they're generally North American, right? And so you look at one of those, and sometimes it can kind of get like a little bit, you'll lose motivation, or players will lose motivation sometimes when they see like, oh, we didn't even make the power rankings again. But at least when we can say, okay, so maybe relative to North America, we're not in the top 20. But in Canada, right now, we're the 3rd best team in Canada, right? That's something that is sometimes easier to, you know, it makes more sense. It has more context when you're presenting that to your bosses, to the administration, to
Right.
different teachers around campus or whatever it is. So I think that's something that we didn't have before. That it's a very simple thing, like there is a process to it, and it takes work, and there's problems, and we'll sort those things out. But overall, like, I think that had tremendous value, and I honestly think a lot of schools didn't take advantage of it enough yet. There are schools on there that we have people in chat asking, how do I get my school to support it more? you know, that would be what I would do. Is if I was at one of those schools with a club right now and we crept into the power rankings, even if it was like 8th, and we were up against like these other, big schools, rivals nearby, I'd go slide it under like the athletics director's door, and I'd say like, hey, we finished. We took out, we're above our rival this week or whatever.
Yeah.
I'd send them an email every week to keep them updated on what they're doing. That kind of stuff can be very valuable, and nothing more that athletics directors hate than their rival down the street getting ranked above them in anything. Doesn't matter what sport it is, right? They're ranked above us. How do we get ranked back above them?
I was gonna jump in and say, like, even last year with the Canadian Nationals, like Wilfrid Laurier University winning Valorant, and I messaged their captain, and they're like, "We don't even have a club right now. We're just like five dudes that like live in a dorm together, and they're like the best at the time best Canadian Valorant team." Like stuff like that, like those stories are still possible because of how new the scene
Yeah.
is. Right?
And just to quickly kind of touch on some of those points for both sides of it. I remember at the beginning of our program, right? I would always be like, hey, I tell my players, hey, whatever we do, like, I don't care if we're, you know, how we're placing internationally. Obviously, the higher the better. But I was like, all right, make sure we beat St. Clair. Do our best. Beat St. Clair. Can you beat St. Clair this week? I was always like, oh, we have a match against St. Clair. All right, you guys better win. So that was part of it. Like, whether or not Shaun saw it the same way, but for us, even because we were the two largest programs at the forefront of Canadian varsity esports at the time of the foundations being built. It was very important to compare with St. Clair, not in a negative way or in, oh, we're like worse than St. Clair or whatever, but it was more of like, okay, we're the two big ones in the space. How do we match up against each other? Obviously, Shaun's taken a bit of a lead as of the recent years. I'll give you that. But it was always like healthy competition, even locally and within Canada, that helped escalate our drive to continuously to be better. Right. It was always something that I talked about with my athletics director, and ever since the university and the college split up, actually, with now UIT, or what was UIT and now On Tech University, they have their own esports. We built like a campus clash every year. We'll have the esports. So they always play soccer against each other every year, for example, right? And the college loses more often than not. But we played them in Rocket League this year for our esports clash, and we wiped the floor with them. And our president was so happy. Like our varsity athletics director was happy. Everyone's like, nice, like build on that, right? And let's talk about that and let's celebrate that. So it goes back to Zach's point of celebrating the small things and the steps that we move forward to even globally. Like I saw the question earlier in Twitch chat about how do we compete against schools in the US. Well, it's about exploring local talent first. What do you have? What is accessible? Who is on your campus that is potentially a amazing player that could be part of your culture, be part of your team? And then once you build off of that and get a couple years rolling, you can kind of get to the point where I would say where me and Shaun, like our programs are kind of where we're looking at recruiting either internationally or outside of our local scope to get players to come to our institutions specifically to play on a certain team. And I believe our Rocket League team can kind of speak on this. Shout out Joel, he's in the chat right now. But so they recently beat Northwood Blue, right? What we would call, at least in the Rocket League scene, like a titan of the collegiate space, and we beat them in a best of 5 series, and that was like huge, right? Something to celebrate. The coach was happy, I was super happy, everybody who knew what was going on was happy. And to go back to Shaun's point about the playing field is currently as level as it'll be, probably. I certainly agree with that, specifically looking at like Rocket League for this past week for Summer League, right? More Canadian schools qualified than ever before. So Canadian schools are on the up. However, it does go back to that point that that I'll reiterate that I made earlier, is the reality of the situation is United schools in the US value athletics, fund athletics in a completely different way than Canadian institutions do. We realistically will never have the same amount of funding as they do, but we've been resourceful till now, and we will be resourceful in the future. I think there are parts of programs that can be made up for, instead of like a tremendous amount of funding. There's steps and things that we can do to grow our programs without the same level of funding and be competitive and still gain global traction, recognition, and a place on that global stage with those guys who get like multi-million-dollar budgets as an operating budget in a year versus, okay, this is how much money I've spent like in 5 years, right? So that's kind of the position that I believe that we'll be in and that we kind of are. So yeah, that's kind of where I would say our program is currently. We're always striving to how do we get to be at the level where we're beating top schools in the US, and how do we stay there? Also, at the same time, to anybody newer in the varsity space, collegiate space, once again, as Zach was saying, celebrate the small things, right? Any accomplishment is an accomplishment, and it should be delivered to your higher administration, whoever needs to see it, and be like, okay, this is awesome, this is happening, and this is why we are valuable.
Right. Yeah, I keep wanting to pitch Andrew a question about provincial competition because I know he's super passionate about it, but he gets up from his chair every 4 seconds right now. He's currently working in his facility. Oh, there he is. Okay, I started talking about him and he rushed back to defend himself. Andrew, do you have a moment?
Yeah.
All right, provincial competition. Let's talk about it. You're like one of the biggest pioneers for like an Alberta tournament league, whatever. What does provincial competition mean to you and to the state program?
Yeah, I think provincial competition is good in the sense of having smaller schools who don't have like that tier one like player status to have that sense of competition with each other. So here at State, we don't have like that great of a talent pool to be that competitive team, but we do want to compete with other provincial schools within Alberta or in Canada in general. So there's another avenue of showing that competition and providing that competition. As well, it's a great way to go back to your provincial government and like, hey, look at how many schools are participating in this province and have an esports program. Can we get some funding to help fund these schools as well? So it creates a nice little like esports system within the provincial government and the provincial province.
Right. And I think some of the value of that too, like you touched on, is like giving a competitive opportunity to teams that, you know, might not be the whatever the heck the esports equivalent of a T1 school is, right? Like I think we're still sorting that out. There was a question in the chat earlier that I want to draw attention to because I know this is something we've talked about internally at the ECPS level and at the NACE level as well that I really liked. The question was, is the end goal for esports to become a strong independent body to be similar to like an NCAA, an NAIA, or a U Sport split? So, you know, obviously kind of within that question, there's this element of a regional or national competition that you know is at the highest level. You know, right now a lot of our competitions are always international. Excuse me, international. We're always playing against American schools, which for better or worse, right? But is there a goal within, you know, Esport Canada Post Secondary, or even just kind of amongst us as directors for a national, like Canadian league or tournaments competition structure?
I mean, I'll jump in and say like at least my feelings. I think everybody's gonna have different feelings and opinions on this one. Like generally for me, I think as soon as we arbitrarily put up that barrier and say, you know, we're just gonna fight amongst ourselves only and not against the American schools, it's almost like we're kind of like bowing out of the fight a little bit. I think we've got a chance right now to not only be like a top program in Canada, but top program in the world or in North America, at least, right? And so I'm not ready to bow out of that fight yet, to be honest with you. I like the fact that we can go up. Like esports allows us that opportunity to compete against schools all around the continent. In athletics, it's just not feasible. You know, it's just financially not viable to do that, right? You can't. Hey, let's drive down from, you know, I know you're especially talking to somebody up at Kiana where you're at. Let's drive down and play against our team. We're playing Texas this week. Let's drive down and play. Like that's not ever going to happen for athletics. But in esports, it actually can happen. Like I know you guys had some extremely long distance
It
games
was
technically this
the
year,
longest esport game in a
distance
regional
wise.
esport game in history. 3,000 miles, Keanu, Fort McMurray, Alberta to Hawaii. Yeah.
Yeah. So like that's one of those the added values that esports has, that like advantage we have over traditional athletics. I'm not ready to just like put up a wall yet and say we're not going to play those games, you know. Um at the same time though, you know, I do think that there's still a lot of value in having some regional competition. So we had, you know, the power rankings and we had the nationals tournament last year, and I do think those created a lot of value for every like the whole ecosystem in Canada. Um, I just wouldn't personally, want that to be the only thing we play in. I like the idea of being able to do that, play that, but then also have our larger competitions against, a more varied talent pool of talent in schools programs.
I would agree, and oh, sorry, go for it.
Oh no, I was about to say I agree with that too. It's that if you have the talent to foster those like team to be able to compete against states or joining those quote unquote T1 like schools, then yeah, have that choice, have that opportunity. But having these like regional, provincial opportunity for schools who don't have that talent pool yet is a great way for them to get things started.
Yeah, having a way to host Canadian-based competition will be super important, and it's going to be super important to, whether, like in our case, the Ontario college market, being able to interact and compete with other market-minded competitors, friends and rivals up and down that 401 corridor. We want to be able to do that in a proficient way. But also, like just the nature of esports and collegiate esports in general, we can't expect one governing collective group in Canada to have all titles that may exist within your campus community appropriately represented at like an all Canadian level. Like I think that's some of the exciting parts, kind of what Shaun was getting to. Like geographically, you can play teams in different markets and kind of use that as a strength and a difference to esports versus traditional sports. And you may need to pursue, you could have some really strong players in a title that's not represented by the core league that you could be bound to, and you may need to, interact with other leagues and conferences around the sector. And I know that's something that I'm really assessing at Conestoga right now is, how can you differentiate yourself as a program? We're not all going to have the same talent pool in the same games. Just because Valorant's the biggest game in the sector doesn't necessarily mean that's where you have your greatest talent pool. Like we're really tapping into right now and understanding the strength of our FIFA community at Conestoga. And I find that could potentially be a challenging game to market to, let's say to Canada nationwide if you were only playing in one Canadian league. So having that flexibility to put, your community in the right opportunities will continue to be very important. And yeah, the thought of taking down like a top tier American or international program, I think that's a great local institutional headline when those times come and go.
Yeah, I specifically wanted to touch on actually because I think out of all of our programs, I think mine is the most heavily rooted within varsity athletics. I understand that there are other programs that fall under varsity, but we are specifically like very, very deeply rooted in varsity. So the conversation and the topic and the question that I get asked a lot is, okay, how do you feel about esports and the OCAA, right? And I've always been hesitant, and I've always had my own reservations in regards to a overarching governing body, because I think within esports, like the culture of how even the tier 2 esports scene closely translated to the collegiate space has always been different from what your traditional sports looked like, right? The biggest example that I can make in terms of this is the idea of amateurism. And amateurism is essentially players cannot financially benefit in or form from playing this sport or game or whatever. So that is a heavily rooted concept within traditional sports that exists in the NCAA, OCAA, and every other governing body that I can think of for traditional sports. That doesn't work in the esports space. That's not the landscape that we've built. It's not the culture that we have. And I don't think it's something that is reasonable to randomly or not randomly impose into the esports scene from those institutions. So there's been talks in the past at the OCAA AGM. There's been conversations. People have talked about esports, and people have talked about, okay, how can the OCAA get involved? And even, I'm sure you were around and you remember this, Shaun, when the NCAA picking up esports and being the governing body, and basically the community chewed them up and spat them out, because the ideas that they were proposing were more imposing on collegiate esports rather than helping to grow the space. And it was more of them trying to retain or attempt to get ownership of the collegiate esports space. So I think, that's part of the thing that I think why necessarily governing body won't work. And I wouldn't necessarily be super supportive of that, but it's why at the same time I'm also super passionate about what ECPS is. We are an advisory body here to help schools build and grow based on certain guidelines that we feel like are appropriate, but nothing necessarily imposing on a school. Okay, you have to run your program this way, and these are the exact rules that you have to follow. Otherwise, you can't be a part of this, right? That's not necessarily something that we push, and that's not something that I would necessarily agree with. So to talk about the direction of these kind of things. And as Shaun said, I'm sure everybody has different opinions on this, but mine is I don't necessarily want to or feel like the collegiate space should be governed by one specific body. However, the benefit of local competition will always be crucial to the growth of programs. So to touch back on that point as well, within provincial, within Canada, these competitions are very valuable because our administration knows more intimately who these institutions are in comparison to if I told the president of my school, like, we beat Northwood University. Who's Northwood University? We don't know who that is. But if I tell them we beat Humber or we beat St. Clair, they're like, oh, that's awesome, right? So the local competition, the local aspect is super important for the development of programs. I agree 100%. But yeah, in terms of the question in the chat, do we want to be the NCAA? Do we want to be the OCAA? I don't think that's the direction that we want to take. I could be wrong. Things change in this space faster than any other. So, but for now, yeah, my personal point of view is I'm rather against becoming something like that.
Right. So we're about 15 minutes over time here, so we're just going to kind of round out the conversation. Thank you everyone for sharing your thoughts on the matter. I guess to kind of put a bow on it, at this moment in time, Esport Canada Post Secondary, we're providing value through power rankings, we're providing value through advocacy and education, but instating a national regulated governing body for competition is not currently in the plan for a number of the reasons that people have suggested.